Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist, and I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now today I have another guest on the show and I'm talking to Hannah Howard from the US, where she lives with her husband, daughter, newly born son and puppy. Hannah is a writer and food expert who spent her formative years in New York eating, drinking, serving, bartending, cooking on a line, flipping giant wheels of cheese and managing restaurants. And she loves to write about delicious things, teach food writing classes, and might just spend all day at a market shopping for fruits and veggies. Her memoir, Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, debuted as Amazon's #1 best-selling memoir in 2018. And her new book, Plenty, a memoir of food and family, is recently out and available to buy. Now, Hannah's relationship with food has been profoundly complicated because on the one hand, she has such a love and passion for it as a real foodie, but on the other hand has struggled with an eating disorder. So Hannah's book Plenty is where Hannah shares her personal reckoning with loss and self-love as she struggles with the ghost of an eating disorder. Her journey is both geographical and psychological as she travels the globe, from New York to Oslo to Italy, to name a few of the destinations travelled. And through a web of vignettes, Hannah reflects on her friendships with a diverse cast of women, these being strong female mentors who have taken on meaningful and creative work with purpose and potential in the male-dominated food industry. Using drippy, delicious imagery, she describes enviable meals and expeditions, finding love and community, and how food has connected her to family and friends. And alongside this, weaving in her own personal journey in ongoing eating disorder recovery, learning to trust and accept her body, and dealing with a devastating pregnancy loss along the way. Hannah's work has been featured in New York Magazine, Vice, Self, Thrillist, Serious Eats, Bust, Refinery 29, Salon, and many others. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today to hear about Hannah's recovery story, her experiences as a passionate foodie and writer, and in dealing with life's loves and losses. Let's get to the conversation. Hi, Hannah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Harriet.
So Hannah, could you introduce yourself, please, to the listeners?
So my name is Hannah Howard. I am a writer and mostly I write about food. I wrote 2 books, Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, about my struggle with and recovery from an eating disorder and my love for food. And then I wrote another book called Plenty, a memoir of food and family that came out a few months ago about finding a community of amazing women in the food world and also starting my family. And I live in both New York City and during the pandemic in New Jersey. And I have a wonderful husband and a toddler and a brand new baby boy, just a few weeks old. And I'm also an eating disorder survivor. I'm in recovery, and that's a big part of my life.
Oh, thank you so much, Hannah, for telling us a bit more about you. I just want to really acknowledge that you have literally just had a baby, haven't you? Very, very recently, a little boy, did you say?
Yes, a little boy named Julius. I'm very much still in the newborn fog. This is my first, it's very exciting. This is like my first professional thing that I'm doing back after having the baby. And it's been exhausting and exciting and challenging and lots of things. So definitely a whirlwind.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, particularly in those very early days where I'm sure
You are, yeah, exhilarated, but also very exhausted.
Yes, I asked my husband because we rescheduled if I thought, do you think I could do it, a few weeks after the birth? And he was like, yeah, why not? And then we got the confirmation. I was like, okay.
Yeah, they were brilliant. I think it's really wonderful. But yeah, I hope you're going to allow yourself lots of like downtime as well, because it's very full on, isn't it? Well, it's very full on, full stop, but particularly in those early weeks.
It really is. It is. And it's strange because it's like a lot of sitting around, and yet it is so exhausting and full on. So it's this weird mix of like you're not going anywhere. It doesn't feel like you're doing much, and yet it's so consuming.
Yeah, no, 110%. So, Hannah, you're a writer, a food expert, like a passionate foodie, and you've struggled with an eating disorder. So, could you tell us a bit about your story and sort of the interplay, I guess, of this quite complex relationship with food?
Absolutely. So, I kind of think of it as having like two sides to it, because on the one hand, I have always loved food and had this joy around it and passion for it. And my mom is a wonderful cook, and I grew up. Some of my best childhood memories are going on these kind of grocery shopping adventures with her, where we go to the little Italian market and the little Middle Eastern market and the farmer's market, and, come home with these amazing things and turn them into even more amazing things. So that was all wonderful. But at the same time, and I don't blame my eating disorder on her in any kind of way, but she was always on a diet, off a diet, kind of unhappy with her body. And I think that's just the symptom of the world that we live in, which is, right, we have this awful diet culture that teaches us that our bodies and the size of our bodies have something to do with our worth, I think, especially as women. And I really, really absorbed that message from a really young age and got the idea. I was the tallest girl in my class. I was the first one to need a bra. And I just had this idea that there was something like really wrong with my body and that it wasn't okay, and that I could and should, I'm doing air quotes, like fix it somehow, because I don't believe anymore that anyone needs to fix their body. But I did believe that at the time through restriction. And I kind of started toying with trying to control my food and had various levels of success. And then I ended up in my first year at university with an anorexia diagnosis, which I felt like was only part of the story, because I did restrict my food, and then I would have these binges, and then I would wake up full of shame and physical discomfort, and then vow to restrict harder, and then this terrible cycle would repeat itself. And so I saw a therapist when I was, 18, but I think I wasn't quite ready to do it. And meanwhile, I was starting to work at these very glamorous, wonderful restaurants in New York City and fall in love with that world. And I had this kind of messed up idea that I could get these jobs because I was thin, which may or may not have been true. But anyway, to make a long story short, this kind of started with years of just my anorexia diagnosis became the very frustrating EDNOS, eating disorder not otherwise specified diagnosis. And I was just finding all these different kind of ways to use food. I kind of used it as a weapon against myself. And no matter if I was binging or restricting or whatever I was doing with food, it did not feel good. It was definitely out of like obsession and fear rather than any kind of kindness to myself. And I lived that way for a lot of years, and it was really, really hard and painful. And about 10 years ago, I just had this like terrible binge and felt like enough was enough in a way. I think I had tried so many things, diets and self-help books, but I ended up at this 12-step meeting, and it really blew my mind. All these people said out loud the things that I could barely admit to myself inside of my own head. And then instead of like lightning striking them from above, they all smiled and laughed and gave each other hugs and went on their way. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And I went back the next day, and that really started. I think there was a part of myself that kind of thought that I was stuck with this eating disorder, that it was a part of me. And this gave me hope that there was something out there. There were people out there who understood it, that the change was possible, that there were people out there who had been through what I had been through, but weren't living that anymore. And that sort of started this process of recovery. And that was about 10 years ago. And it's been a journey, and my life has gotten better and bigger, and my relationship with food and myself has gotten about 1,000,000 times happier.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that you're kind of like really coming out the other side of that like very self-destructive place with food. And was it the 12-step program? Like, did you sort of stick with that as the recovery treatment, or was that kind of one aspect of many things that helped you recover?
It was a big aspect, but it was just one. And one of the things that I think is so brilliant about it is that they encourage you to get outside help where you might need. So I went back to therapy, and I was in a place where I feel like I was just a lot more ready for it, ready to be honest, ready to kind of do that work that I just, for whatever reason, wasn't when I was much younger. And I think the other thing about it that really helped was just the aspect of community. For me, my eating disorder was such an incredibly lonely thing, even though it was probably obvious to anyone close to me. It was my deepest, darkest secret, and I was so ashamed about it. I never talked about it, not even to the people in my life that were closest to me. And one of the aspects of the 12-step program is just kind of community and sharing and connecting. And that it took some time for me, and I think it still does. Like, honesty is a process, right? And we all can like be more and more honest with ourselves. And so it's taken a lot of time, but that sort of just that, even that I'm talking to you, in this public forum about my struggles, I think that's a huge sign of recovery, and that part of just that kind of openness of writing about it, talking about it, having people in my life who have been there and understand, like, that's been a huge aspect of my recovery as well.
Sure. So from going from being in that very sort of isolated place where it's very secretive and you probably felt a lot of shame, just talking openly, writing, having that sense of community, that's been such an important part of helping you move along the road.
Exactly. And it's kind of right. It's just such a stark contrast of having this thing that it was probably my worst fear for someone to find out. And now I'm telling people, so there you have it. It's definitely a huge change and a huge part of my own recovery.
And I guess like writing is obviously, a huge part of your journey, for your love of food and your recovery, like kind of both those aspects. And I know Plenty is your second book. So what really inspired you to write this second book, moving on from your first one?
I had talking about fear, I was really excited and of course wanted to write this book, and I've always loved to write. So writing a book was a dream of mine. But, the first book, which is a lot about my eating disorder journey, I was so afraid to share that. It's very vulnerable. And before it came out, I just had like many sleepless nights and really didn't know how the experience would go. And it turned out to be a really positive one. Just so many people writing to me saying, I feel less alone, or you express something that I've been through but didn't have the words or the opportunity to share. And that made my heart like just burst. It felt like so worth all the fear and everything that I had about it. And it felt so rewarding and satisfying. Like that was kind of my biggest dream for the book. So I definitely wanted to write another book. And I definitely had that sort of sophomore dilemma of like, where do we go from here? And so it's another memoir. I think I just have this kind of, I don't know if it's a love for or a need for turning my personal experiences into stories and sharing them. And so I talk about meeting my husband and also some really hard things about we lost our first pregnancy, which was really devastating. And I wrote about that. And then about finding this community of women in the food world. And I also in the book talk about kind of the next chapter of like living life in recovery and what does that look like? And what does that look like as a person in the food industry? Yeah, I think I really wanted to answer the question. I realized that I had all these amazing mentors in my career who were men. And I was like, why is that? And where are the women? And so the book is largely about kind of finding women that either are kinds of mentors to me or friends or who I want to be friends and mentors to me.
It sounds incredibly inspiring. And I think just kind of reading up on your book as well, I hadn't really reflected myself on just how male dominated, I guess, the food industry is. And I think it's just wonderful how you've consciously sought out these female mentors. So could you tell us as well just a little bit about some of these really inspiring women that you interviewed and talked to for the book?
Sure. Well, some of them, like my mom has a chapter in the book. My friend Janice, who I worked with, who was the first woman in her family to go to college, who ended up as a chef. But then I also have people who are quite accomplished. I took a 7.5-hour train ride when I was pregnant with my daughter up to Vermont to spend time with Allison Hooper, who is one of the founders of Vermont Creamery. And she's really one of the pioneers of artisan cheese in the US and just like this amazing cheesemaker who really paved the way and started making goat cheese in the 80s when people were like, goat cheese, that's crazy, and really had a vision and is just such a down-to-earth, lovely person. One of the women is Manal Kahi, who runs it was a catering company at the time of the book. After COVID, it's kind of expanded its purview, but her company is called Eat Offbeat. And it employs refugee chefs from around the world, and they each make food inspired by their home countries. And their food is amazing, and it's just such a cool important endeavor. And I even talked to Haley, the coffee shop owner next to my apartment in Brooklyn, who really kind of made the neighborhood feel like home, and was a chef before she opened her coffee shop, and just kind of really, to me, embodied this idea of food creating community, because her spot was always a place that made the neighborhood feel like really special. And yeah, so all kinds, and those are just some of the women. There's a few more. There's an Irish barge pilot who runs a small luxury hotel barge that goes near Bordeaux in the south of France. There's a amazing sommelier and restaurateur who I met in Brooklyn. So all kinds of, Paola is one of the women. She's a Italian chef who kind of left the restaurant industry to start a cooking school online. And this is before COVID. So she's been really successful recently. Yeah. That's most of the cast of characters.
Sure. No, it sounds like a really diverse mix of people and doing really sort of fascinating and interesting and creative roles. It must have been a really inspiring journey.
It was so fun. I feel so lucky that this is my career. Like just getting to spend time with these women was a huge pleasure.
So have you found as well, like your obviously like your passion for food and being this sort of foodie and working in restaurants and all of that, have you found, has that actually supported you as well with your recovery and your healing from the eating disorder?
You know, it really has. It's not to say it hasn't been challenging, but I do think of those like threads of my relationship with food, of having like in my eating disorder, there was this element there of like real genuine curiosity and interest and love, but it was so overshadowed by fear and obsession and just like this much darker side of the equation. And recovery for me has just been kind of turning the dial, and it's been like slowly but surely, like turning the volume down on that fear and obsession and up on the other stuff. And I do think that kind of embracing the joy of food, the excitement of food, you know, one of the things that's drawn me to keep writing about food is the amazing stories of the people who make it and sell it and are part of this world. Like that kind of tuning into that has really helped me connect with food in a really positive way and kind of quiet those other parts of my, what I kind of think of as like the eating disorder part of my brain is it's still there. I think I might always have to still kind of reckon with it, but it's so much quieter and less intrusive. And, you know, I have these other like tools to kind of talk back to it. So I think getting to celebrate food through my work has really helped with that. But it's also a challenge. Like some, you know, I've written about this, like, especially earlier in my career when I was really up close and personal. Like I worked in a cheese cave, I worked behind a cheese counter, I worked in restaurants. And sometimes just, it's tough for a recovering eating disorder person to be like around food all the time on a hard day. But on a good day, it's kind of wonderful. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's very validating as well, just for people to hear that, you know, it sounds like your relationship with the eating disorder has just changed so much and that voice is quietened. But, you know, still there are probably days, aren't there, where you have to really kind of dig deep and find those tools to challenge that voice. And, you know, some days are probably easier than others.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a tough, and for me, I think the food healing has come faster, and the body image healing is sometimes lags behind. And we had just come home from the hospital a few weeks ago and had a few family members come over for Thanksgiving. And I had this idea that we had this brand new baby and I wanted a cute picture with my family. And I did not like the picture. And I had this, like, it just immediately brought me back to that old eating disorder place where that would have set me into this spiral of like self-loathing and misery and, you know, trying to punish myself or whatever it would be. And I didn't go there for too long. And I do have I have people to call. I have tools. I can discuss it with someone who gets it. I can take some breaths. I can focus on something else. I have so many like ways that I can walk through these sorts of situations. And yet I think because I was just like so exhausted and full of hormones, like my defenses were kind of down. So I feel like it got to me more than it might have otherwise. And even so, you know, it was okay. Like it maybe ruined like a few minutes, but it didn't ruin my whole day or ruin my whole week or ruin my whole month like it would have done in the past.
Sure. And I think it's so true for many people, isn't it? That I think that body image aspect often does lag behind other parts of recovery. And also pregnancy and post-birth are really challenging times because it does still feel in a very toxic way that there is a kind of pressure to get your body back and, you know, all these unrealistic expectations after having a baby.
Yeah. And right, your body is just changing in all of these ways that you have kind of limited control over. And it is a really intense time. Although I went into pregnancy, especially the first time around, kind of with my guard up for that reason and knowing that could be really triggering or challenging. But I actually found it was pretty amazing for my recovery because I had heard the kind of advice to appreciate your body for what it does rather than how it looks. But that always seemed to me like, yeah, that's nice, but it didn't really sink in. But then something about actually like creating a human being in my body did feel so wild and miraculous and wonderful that I was able to love my body in a way that I hadn't before, because I was really proud of it for making this amazing little person. And that felt to me pretty profound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I know you talk about, quite a difficult topic in your book as well about your first pregnancy loss and, that sort of triggered as well sort of issues around your eating disorder recovery. And so would you mind just sharing a little more about that?
Definitely. Yeah. So I got married, like 3 years ago. And then a few months afterwards, my husband and I decided that we wanted to try for a child, and we got pregnant right away. And we were both so excited and had kind of a pretty like sudden, and now I know how common this is, but at the time I didn't quite understand it. We were actually traveling. He's from the UK, and we were at a wedding with friends and just had this like pretty sudden, devastating miscarriage. And it did kind of feel, it was a challenging, at the time it was just so sad. I didn't quite understand how sad I would feel around it. And so it was like emotionally hard. And I guess in a way it had that similarity with eating disorders, feeling kind of shameful. Like for some reason, it's something that people don't talk about very much. And we hadn't told very many people at all that we were pregnant because it was still early-ish days. And so it felt so weird kind of breaking the news in that way. Like, oh, we were pregnant, but not anymore. So yeah, so I'm really glad I got to write about it because so many people have been through this experience, and it did help in a way. And it was a hard kind of body experience too, because I felt like my body had let me down, and it just helped to talk to, I have a wonderful friend who's a midwife, and to talk to our doctor and kind of realize that like, that's not really what, that's not it. Like, it's not, and I think there's this urge to kind of blame yourself and think like, oh, did I have too much coffee? Did I forget to take my prenatal vitamins? And it's like, no, that's not it either. Like, this is a really common thing that happens that is like out of our control. So that was kind of reassuring.
Yeah, thank you that you're sharing that in your book. I think it is such a devastating and sad and isolating thing to go through, isn't it? And it's not talked about still enough. So I think, just really helpful, just that honest sharing. Because I think so many people listening as well that have been through that will share those kind of thoughts and feelings that people have about, did I do something wrong, or just feeling really isolated, feeling sad. And yeah, I think it's just really helpful to feel that you're sort of smashing some of those taboos really, and, being really vulnerable.
Yes, absolutely. I think, the writing itself about it, people have asked like, oh, is it cathartic? And it's like, no, it was really hard because I think to do something justice like that, I have to kind of jump back into the moment. And so it's hard to kind of dredge up all of the worst of it. But I think for me, what has been cathartic is the talking about it, sharing about it, having other people say like, thank you for writing about it. That has felt like really helpful and healing.
Well, that's so good to hear. And I'm sure like you've just had a baby, you are, I'm sure, more than occupied in your day to day at the moment, but are you even thinking about your next book, or is it too early?
I'm always thinking about my next book. I feel like it's such a privilege to get to write books, and I hope to write more. And I have a bunch of ideas brewing. I think I'm still in the ideas brewing stage, but I'm thinking about both more food stories and kind of branching out and trying something really different. So we'll see. I'm kind of enjoying this time to focus on babies, but I'm also already just a few weeks in, like, kind of itchy to write some more. So I will definitely be back at it.
Yeah, so it's kind of watch this space for your fans and future fans. So
Yeah.
what would you say, Hannah, as well, for any sort of tips that you would sort of share with the listeners on, obviously you're someone who has this real passion for food and is really tapping, in more recent years, more and more into the joy and celebration and community. But for anyone who's listening and feels like, oh, I feel so far away from that right now, could you even give some perhaps like baby steps to start to walk that road?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is just that sort of self-compassion, that it helped me to remember that I had been doing one, kind of relating to food and, doing these sort of behaviors and having these thoughts for my whole life. So it wasn't like one day I was just going to suddenly change everything. Like, this is a long journey, and that's okay. So, just some kind of acceptance and compassion from where you are, and that it can change with time, but maybe, right, it's not like you're going to go from being, it's not like there's a 180 that's just going to happen one day. For me, it's been more of like a slow and steady. I mean, there have been these little moments that I feel like I've kind of had realizations or jumps, but in general, it's been like this one day, the next day, like slow progress. So it's okay to have like one little tiny win, one little tiny action or step. I think that's so powerful, and it can lead to the next one. And so I feel like if it's even just like treating yourself to something that you like, that your eating disorder tells you not to eat, and trying to enjoy it, or even if you're not there yet, like, just, I think it just kind of being kind to myself does not come naturally. So practicing that has been really huge.
Thank you. I think great advice. And can I ask you, Hannah, because obviously I'm sure you are like so much more flexible now with your eating than you were before, but did you find in your recovery, like, did you sort of reintroduce foods kind of, like step by step, or, did you have a process for it, or was it much more sort of like intuitive, go with the flow as you kind of encounter different situations?
It was pretty intuitive, but I definitely took a little time. Like, for years in recovery, I pretty much had the same breakfast every day, because it was like, it felt good and like safe and okay. And then I felt like I could kind of take more risks with lunch and dinner and snacks. But like, for whatever reason, I was like not really ready with that breakfast. But like, that was okay, and that was like a huge progress. So I kind of feel, and then, that for now, that feels like a really long time ago, and I have moved on from that. But I feel like whatever kind of works for you is okay. And yeah.
Oh yeah, there's no one size fits all, is there? I think we're all kind of on our own journey with this.
Absolutely. I think, yes, everyone's different. And yeah, it's been this like nice dual thing of having like recovery friends to relate to, but also realizing that, right, it's not like a cookie cutter journey that anyone's on, and we're all going to have a little bit different processes and stories, and that's part of the beauty of it as well.
So Hannah, where can people find you if they wanted to find out more about your writing, and also if they want to get hold of either of your books?
My website to find me online is hannahhoward.nyc, HANNAH Howard.nyc. And I'm on Instagram at Hannah M. Howard. And you can find my book at Amazon, at bookshop.org, or at the major book retailers.
Okay, lovely. Well, I'm sure, Hannah, that a lot of people will be really interested to, read both of your books. So I think you have quite a unique approach where you are really combining that absolute love and passion for food and with eating disorder recovery. So I'm sure that will appeal really to so many people listening.
I hope so. When I was submitting the book to publishers, people actually said to me, I think that this kind of foodie, food love, and the eating disorder stories are really separate, and we don't see an overlap. And I was thinking, I think you're wrong. So I'm glad you said that, because I think there absolutely is a lot of room where both of those things come together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Hannah, I'd just like to really thank you for coming on the podcast today and for sharing really openly and inspiring the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me and for the amazing work that you do.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did, and do go and check out all of Hannah's details in the show notes. If you're not following me already, do seek me out on Instagram at the Eating Disorder Therapist. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to theeatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you're enjoying this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.